Okay, so we can go over some of the things in the changelog here. So I just wanted to talk about a couple things in the newest 1.2 pre-release version. I think I've done the 1.1 version on a previous video on my channel, but again, just want to do these in kind of the live streams here now. So we have the one thing actually I do want to point out is this 1.0, 1.2.0 pre-release 6, which was kind of in the middle of December last year. The only thing that says it was changed is promotion preparation. So, I'm kind of reading into this on my own a little bit, thinking that, this is likely going to be a full released version sometime very soon. But of course, no official word on that yet. And then so going into excuse me, some of the actual changes from the pre-release 4 version, wanted to talk about a couple things here. So there is this defensive fix for rare hierarchy window on cleanup exception, typically when breakpoint debugging. This is something that I had actually experienced where I was basically getting all kinds of errors thrown just like when I was clicking things in the entities hierarchy window. And it was particularly annoying when I had a debugger connected to Unity because it would break on that exception and then freeze everything and then kick me back over to my, IDE where I was doing the debugging. And I just couldn't really do anything because it was basically spitting out this exception every single frame. So even if I skipped past it, it would just throw it again. And then it was kind of annoying because I had to disconnect the debugger. And then, could go back and do things. If I needed to debug again, then I'd have to reconnect the debugger. So it was a little bit annoying there, but I'm glad that that's fixed. I'm not entirely sure if I'm remembering this correctly because I'm going back and forth between a bunch of different projects of different versions. But I thought I had seen this happen a couple times recently. So I can't remember if this was on a 1.2 version or just a 1.0 version. So hope that's fixed because that was a particularly annoying one for me. And then so just talking about some of the entity queries here. So there's an entity query that uses the with none with an enableable component T will now insert a read dependency on T in the system's query so that jobs which enable and disable T are included in the system's input dependencies. So definitely a good thing to just kind of add to our dependency queries, when we're kind of doing any particular things with that. This one I thought was just kind of funny here. Selecting entities and systems now works again. No additional context to that, but I think that was another one that I had noticed at one point in it does seem to be fixed now in the 1.2 version, but there was a time where I would click things again in entities hierarchy and then it didn't show up in the inspector. And then I had to ended up finding this weird workaround way where I could select something else and then, or select the entity another way. But it was very, very annoying. So glad that one is resolved, but how it broke in the first place, not exactly sure on that one. So going into a previous version of 1.2, so here's something that was added, serialization support for Unity Object Ref, which works in the build system. This means an unmanaged iComponent data can reference Unity assets and works in a build loaded from a subscene, and the same as with managed components. Now, I wanted to bring this up because I know that Unity Object Ref is a particularly useful thing, and I know, Danny, you're a little bit fond of that, so do you have anything to say on Unity Object Ref and just kind of maybe give people a quick idea of what it is?
I mean, it's one of my, I so love that feature because it is so lovely being able to have a bursted situation where you can change around the managed references. For instance, a very popular thing where we, have a shit ton of references, but all we're doing is manipulating those references is entities graphics, where you see this thing called a render mesh array, and the render mesh array is just a conglomerate of all the meshes and materials in your scene. So it will try to figure out, all these individual objects have these meshes on them and all these materials, and it will try to merge them into one thing. obviously these are all references, and so wouldn't it be lovely being able to have a thing that is bursted, being able to do this compression, also because it is an action you can very much vectorize in a hash set. And so like having an unmanaged reference to stuff is just so powerful. And also the fact that you can do this, like you can just put an I component data on your entity during baking, and it store a reference to a Unity object ref of mesh and Unity object ref of texture, and it just works. It's so nice. It's like yeah.
I'm sure we'll definitely get into Unity object ref at some point on this show because very, very handy. And then the last thing that I was just going to bring up in the regular ECS API is that we now have several entity command buffer commands will now correctly fix up entity references within component values recorded in commands to replace the temporary entities created at record time. So if you know how entity command buffers work, if you say instantiate an entity, before that entity gets played, it gets just kind of like a default, basically like garbage entity ID and index. And then, so if you try to like store a reference to that garbage index and then use it later on, then you start getting kinds of errors and stuff like that. But luckily, this seems like it's kind of cleaned up some things where if you are doing some, instantiation and doing things with like the linked entity group and all that, during kind of that time where you're adding commands to the entity command buffer, it should interpret those all correctly if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
Sweet. And then real quick, I just wanted to bring up a couple things on the netcode for entities changes, just because I've been using the netcode for entities stuff a lot lately as I've been working on my netcode for entities tutorial, which hopefully should be out within the next couple of weeks here. But basically, there are two really cool things that they added here. So you can now disable the automatic entities iCustom bootstrapping. Basically, the automatic iCustom bootstrapping, what it does is if you hit play or create a build and you start your game, it'll automatically create worlds for the client world and server world. Now that ends up being a little bit of a problem because if you want to have maybe some like entrance logic where you kind of like are trying to like enter a specific server, like connect to a specific server or something like that, like you don't want the game to just automatically build the client and server worlds for you. You want to like have a little bit of control over that as the developer. So it wasn't too difficult. You could like previously create like a system where it would like ignore creating those worlds, and then when you wanted to manually create the worlds, you could do that. So now they've actually added a couple easy ways to do this. One of them, which I haven't actually found this option in the project settings, but apparently there's a way that you can disable it in the project settings. I haven't actually found that, but there is a override automatic netcode bootstrap mono behavior, which you can add just to a game object in your scene. And then just set the disabled option on there to disable that automatic bootstrapping so those worlds aren't created by default. The other thing that I wanted to point out, which was super cool, and by the way, I am using both these features in the new netcode for entities tutorial because they are very handy. So there is a new netcode config scriptable object, and so this has basically like everything in that you would want to configure for your netcode in here. So you can like configure your update rate and all kinds of different things. There's like probably like 20 to 30 different fields of things that you can configure in here. But you can reference this asset super easily from any system or any authoring script or anything like that. So you can if you need to calculate some tick count based off of like a timer and the number of ticks and like the server update rate, you can like easily do that just by referencing this netcode config scriptable object. So something super handy to have. So anyways, that is it for the context switch. Do you have any other things that you'd like to point out or add there?
Not really, but I do see another question, which is this one: does Unity Object Ref have API to check if ref exists? And yes, it does. I recommend checking the documentation, but you can see it's just is valid. So you can do dot is valid, and it will check if an object actually maps back to
Awesome.
it.
Awesome. Easy.
Yes.